The Shemoneh Esrei is about 450 words, and although there are very minor variations between different Jewish groups, all the blessings are in the same order, and they all have the same topics. And this text has served us for this precise text has served us for more than 1,000 years, and the basic structure has served us for 2,000 years. It's a very old Jewish institution. Almost all of the words and phrases are taken from the Tanakh. Those who composed the prayers took them from the works of the Tanakh. So they weren't making up the words; they were making up the ideas. The rabbinic authorities did set the order and the basic content of the prayers, that they did do. And perhaps we'll talk another time about the structure 3 times a day, and on Shabbos an extra one, and so forth and so on. But since it's like 450 words, which is like not less than 2 pages in normal print, the words have to be studied with great care. Now, there are a lot of commentaries on the Siddur, and some good ones in English as well. What I tell you is a reflection of my interests only. It's not as if what I tell you is more important or more fundamental than what other people will tell you, or other things that you will read. These are things that I have come to learn because of my particular background and my particular interest. But I hope that studying it will reveal to you that there is some enormous depth here, and also stimulate you to go to other shiurim or look at other sources on the Siddur. This could be a lifelong project, because you go to daven 3 times a day, and you don't want it to become rote. You don't want it to become automatic. One thing you can do is to study it to get more meanings out of it, and that will refresh your understanding and your attention. And if you are in a situation where you're not fluent in Hebrew, so you need to know 2 things. Number 1, if you say the prayers in English, you have satisfied the obligation of prayer. Number 2, it would be better if you said it in Hebrew. Interestingly, if you say it in Hebrew without understanding it, there are many who say you have satisfied the obligation of prayer, and I'm not going to go into that in detail. But I say you can have the best of both worlds. You have a siddur facing English and Hebrew. Take your pencil and write in the Hebrew side over the Hebrew word the English meaning. Yes, you can write in the siddur, no problem. And do that for 1 or 2 words. And when you're going through the prayer, when you say those words in Hebrew, and then continue in English. If you do that, let's say 2 words a week, in 20 weeks, you'll have a great many words, and a lot of the words repeat. Baruch is said a lot of times. So you get that one once, you already got, a whole string of them. And in not too long a period of time, you'll be saying the whole thing in Hebrew and understanding it. So that should be your goal. In the meantime, the parts that you don't understand, just say in English, and you have satisfied your obligation. Okay, now we're starting on page 98. There is a verse with which we start, which is an introduction to the Shemoneh Esrei. My Lord, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Now, I'm going to make an introductory remark, which will have to serve us almost continuously. There are many different names for God. And when you are saying a verse and has a name for God, it's customary, unless you're saying the entire verse, to say Hashem. But we use H-A-S-H-E-M no matter what name of God it is. So you're not registering that's a different name. Here, it's the name Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. Not the name Yud and the Hey and Vav and the Hey. And the different names have different connotations. So that's something which it is worthwhile to keep in mind when you are saying a verse, if you can. Now here it says, we're asking Hashem under the name Aleph Dalet, to open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. Which means opening the lips, triggering the ability to speak is something we're asking God for. And once it's triggered from above, this is what we're going to do with it. We're going to speak his praise. So that means the praise is within us. The vehicle of language to express the praise is something which needs to be provided. Also, the word praise seems to be a word that covers the whole of the prayer. That's not obvious, because traditionally the prayer is broken up into 3 sections. The first 3 blessings are praise. The next 13 are petition, where you're asking for things. The next to last is thanksgiving. And those are the 3 sections of the prayers. There's praise, petition, and thanksgiving. No, if you hear that, you think, well, only a fairly small minority of the prayers is praise. Why then would the word praise be used for the whole package? Why don't we have a separate petition to enable us to give thanks appropriately, or enable us to make our requests appropriately? And the idea is that although asking for something isn't directly praise, if you think about it, it implies praise. Many of the things that we do have an implication of praise. So, for example, when you ask someone for something, what are you implying about the person and your relationship to the person?
They can probably give it to you.
Number 1, they have the capacity to give it to you. And number 2, they're not going to ignore you. You're in a relationship with them. Presumably they already care about you. So, if I said directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are the one running the world and you have everything under your control, that would be praise, right? If I ask him for something and imply that he's the one who's running the world, that's also praise. So there's an aspect of praise even in petition. So I think the word tehillah, and by the way, there are different words for praise also. I'm not able to give you the specific semantics of the word tehillah, but maybe that would help. But speaking of God's greatness is implied by many of the things that we do, even if it isn't directly the application, like petition. Now, I told you when we began the series on the Shema, I have a variety of interests, and one of them is Kabbalistic. I want to show you something here. Do we have markers here? For the we have a marker here?
In the bookshelf.
In the bookshelf.
The third.
Okay. So now, the name that we start with is, well, I'm going to write it in script. Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. Now, the other common name of Hashem is Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. If you look in certain types of Sidurim, basically Sephardi Sidurim, you'll see the following set of letters. This is the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey interspersed with the Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. It's a way of incorporating both names. Even though only one name is pronounced, it's a way of incorporating the meaning of both names together. And by the way, if you look in old Sidurim in America, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, sometimes you'll see that the way they write, what we would say is Hashem, Baruch Atah Hashem, they would write it Yud. What's the matter here? Yud, Yud. Well, one explanation why they put the two Yuds together is because this combination begins with the Yud and ends with the Yud. So it's like an abbreviation for that combination. Now, the four-letter name, Yud and Hey, Vav and Hey, has many, many uses and many, many associations. One of the associations in the Zohar is that it's a graphic of a sword. The Yud, yeah, thank you. I'll get this one down here also, I think. What happened there? Here's a black one. See if this works. The Yud is like the grip of the sword. The Vav, this way, is the metal shank of the sword. And the Heys are the blades. Now, we are told that when you say the Shema, you are using a sword to cut off negative forces. That's something about the Shema. This is what I'm telling you with Zohar. Now, when you come to Shemoneh Esrei, put the sword away. Put it away. The Shemoneh Esrei is about rachamim, it's about mercy. Not about battles, and not about aggression, and not about defending yourself. It's about mercy. Okay, so if the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey are the sword, this is the handle, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud has in it the word din. Dalet, Yud, Nun is din. Din is strict judgment. Strict judgment. But it has an aleph, which means that this word contains strict judgment. It's a word that contains it. Okay, so the picture now the Zohar gives us is this. The Yud is the handle. The Hey, Vav, Hey is the shank with which you cut. And it's now in a sheath. The Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud is the sheath into which the shank of the sword is inserted so that only the handle is sticking out. That's putting the sword back in its sheath. That's a tip of what's going on in the first word of this verse. You say Aleph, Dalet, Yud. You have in mind that it's integrated with the Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei in this way, and you have in mind putting the sword away. We're coming for mercy. When I read that, and I was looking for something else, I just, Providence brought me to it. When I read that, I thought to myself, do I know what I'm doing? No, I don't. I really don't know what I'm doing. If that's what's in this one word, can you imagine the mountains of associations and associated nuances there are in every word of and every word of everything else? So that's just to give you an idea, first of all, of your stance when you come to the Shemoneh Esrei, and also an idea of the limitless complexity and depth that the Torah sources have. Are we together so far? Yeah.
It's a little side point, but is the reason why we pronounce Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei because of the Aleph, Dun, Dalet, Nun, like because it means my Lord? Like Ado.
I don't think it's because of the meaning. We can't pronounce the name because the pronunciation was and still is a secret. It could be, the commentators I've seen, could be there are some people who know the secret, even today. The high priests in the temple, when they said the name, used to say it with the appropriate pronunciation for that name. But we don't have it. So we say this name because it's a name that we do understand. Now, Kabbalistically, the names are related, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But when you see in good texts like the Art Scroll here, when they have the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, they don't put any vowels at all. What has happened is that the vowels from Aleph Dalet have been placed under the Yud Kei Vav Kei because that's the way you pronounce it in some texts. But it's better to leave the vowels out altogether because they're not relevant to those letters. So they form an inappropriate mixture. Okay, now the first word of the Shemoneh Esrei, Baruch. This is a very complex word, and I'll just tell you a few of the things that are said about it, and then there's a certain way of putting two of them together, which I think gives a very graphic picture of who we are and who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is and how we relate to him. The verb, the three letters, Beis Reish Chaf, are the verb of blessing. Baruch, grammatically, simplest reading of it is blessed. That's the way they translate it in the Art Scroll. Of course, nobody talks that way, and most people, when they say it, don't know what it means. Have any clue what blessed means?
Not blessed, but blessed.
Well, blessed, okay. What does it mean, blessed?
To have received a blessing.
Yes,
So that's
to have received a blessing. It's the passive voice of the verb to bless. Someone else has blessed this one, the blessed one. Okay. Now we say, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, Hashem. How exactly is that going to work? He received a blessing from somebody else? Well, maybe at this point we should ask, what exactly is a blessing? What is a blessing? I'm not going to do the whole job, but we have in English a very telling phrase. You've heard of the phrase, a blessing in disguise? What does that mean? It means that when it happened, I was very unhappy. When it happened, I was very disturbed by the fact that it happened. Only later on did I find out that it was really very good for me. That means blessing describes something that's really good for you. Wow, now this makes it very difficult. God is blessed. He received something that's very good for him. Who did he receive it from? Why did he need it? Isn't God totally self-sufficient, totally self-defined, totally independent? What could it possibly mean to say that God is blessed? So, that's one question. Let's leave it on the side. There's another meaning to this word, Baruch. I'm just reminded, there are like three other meanings as well that I'm talking about. Another meaning, which is the source of blessing. Oh, he's the source of blessing. That sounds terrific. Why not? He's the one who creates the world. He's the one who runs the world. He's the one who bestows good things on his creatures. Indeed, the word Baruch could be related to Rachum and Chanun. Rachum means merciful. Chanun means gracious. Merciful means one who does mercy to others. Gracious means one who is gracious to others. So Baruch would be one who gives blessing to others. Then the two meanings of Baruch are sort of opposites. One is he gives blessing to others, and this other meaning is others give blessing to him. So let's try to figure out, what does it mean that others give blessing to him? What could that mean? Well, in a verse in Esrei, Kadosh Baruch is described as chosid. Chosid means someone who's a practitioner of chesed. Chesed is loving kindness. God is a practitioner of loving kindness. So are people. A person who gets the title of chosid, not now talking about wearing fur hats on Shabbos, talking about people, and this word goes back to the Tanakh. A chosid is someone who practices loving kindness. The Gemara says, Ezu chosid, who is the one who practices loving kindness? Hamischaser im kono, who does loving kindness with his creator. Wow. A real chassid, not only with his creator, but including his creator. He does loving kindness with his creator. Well, there you are again. It sounds like we're able to give something good to our creator. Now, the answer I'm going to tell you is based on a certain picture, and the status of that picture itself could be analyzed and discussed and described in various ways. Kadosh Baruch Hu presents himself to us in certain ways. So there's a difference between what he is in and of himself versus how he presents himself. Most sources, both philosophical and Kabbalistic, say in terms of describing what he is in and of himself, we're totally incompetent to do that. We have not got the ability to understand that. All we can work with is how he presents himself to us. We shouldn't confuse how he presents himself to us with what he is. One of the ways he presents himself to us is this. He created a world, and he created a world for a purpose. And he invited us to be partners in pursuing and accomplishing that purpose. It's become a joint project. So, if a Jew does something to push that purpose forward, he is in that sense giving something to the Creator which is good for the Creator. The Creator chooses a purpose, it's good. The Creator doesn't make mistakes like we do. We choose purposes and sometimes they're bad for us. That's not possible with the Creator. He's chosen to create the world for a purpose. He's invited us to contribute to the purpose. When we contribute to the purpose, we're giving something to him that's good. That's how it can be that he receives a blessing from us. Within that picture, he set it up that way, that we should be the ones who bestow this blessing upon him. Okay. What's the purpose? The purpose is that he should bestow good on us. That's the purpose of the creation. The principle out of which the whole creation comes is loving kindness. His loving kindness. So now you have here a kind of mutual interaction. We are presenting him with blessing, which is good for him, which is our loving kindness to him. And the purpose of the entire exercise is that he should give something good to us, which is his loving kindness to us. It's a relationship of mutual loving kindness. But it's even more than that. It's even tighter, more tightly defined than that. What exactly are we doing? What is our contribution to the world that enables the outcome that he can do loving kindness to us? Our contribution is to make ourselves worthy and prepared and capable of receiving the kindness that he wants to give to us. Because Baruch Hu has set up the world in such a way that the maximum good that he can do is dependent upon our participation in the process by making ourselves worthy and prepared for the kindness he wants to give us. So, our contribution to him is making ourselves worthy so that then he can provide us with the best possible good. So it is really a relationship of mutual blessing. We bless him and he blesses us. The blessing that we give him is to make it possible for him to give to us the blessing he wants to give to us. That's all tied up in the one word Baruch. And since it is all tied up in the one word Baruch, it might be appropriate, at least the first time you say Baruch and Shemoneh Esrei, to stop for 3 seconds to think of that. Wow. It's that kind of mutual interaction relationship. And then maybe some of the other times it says Baruch as well. Okay? Now, I can't see. Is your hand up?
Yeah.
No. Yes, okay. You want to ask a question?
So why do we not say Hashem's name? Why not allowed to pronounce Hashem? Like this one, the Yud Hey Vav Hey.
I'm not following. Why do we?
Why cannot say this name of Hashem?
Because you mean to say the name itself, to pronounce the name?
Like Baruch atah Adonai, Baruch atah Yahweh, like that.
Because we don't know the right pronunciation. Pronunciation that we will make with these letters will be wrong.
All right, I get it.
This was a secret that even in biblical times, when the priests in the temple, and they used to say it in such a way that people couldn't hear it. They would all say it together. It was indistinct. Right? It's part of the mystical tradition that goes all the way back to Moses, really. So it wasn't supposed to be common knowledge. So we're not going to say it in a way that's wrong. Okay, now the next word is you. And I have seen some commentators say that's the most difficult word in the Shemoneh Esrei to say. Because YOU can only be said to someone who's present. It's what's called second person in English grammar. As opposed to HE, which can be said to refer to someone who's absent, YOU can only be said to refer to someone who's present. And that means you have to picture yourself in God's presence. In fact, there are those who explain the Rambam, the essence of prayer is to be conscious of the fact that you are in God's presence. That's the essence. The words are the words, and the ideas are the ideas, and the emotions are the emotions. But if you picture yourself in God's presence, then you're in the position of prayer, and then you say it with more attention or less attention. You satisfy your obligation, better or worse. But if you don't picture yourself in God's presence, what you're doing isn't prayer at all. It's not prayer at all. You just lost the essence. Something else, or nothing. So the word you here is very important. This two should have a little pause. Atah. And then to go on. Okay? You want to say something?
Yeah. I'm almost a little confused about what we're supposed to imagine ourselves in Hashem's presence. I think we've talked about it in this class before. Hashem has like no physical location. So if there's no spatial aspect, how can we be he's not here, but he's present?
So that's a very good question. Let's imagine that you're having a conversation, and you're explaining something, and in the middle it becomes obvious to you that the other person's not listening. So, are you in that person's presence? Well, yes and no. You're in physical proximity. That would be true if he was asleep. But if you're communicating, the presence that you want is his attention. And indeed, if you're speaking on a telephone, you could have his attention even if he's not physically proximate. So this is another sense of being in Hashem's presence. Obviously, God is omnipresent. His will sustains the existence of everything in the universe equally, but he doesn't manifest himself equally in all places. He doesn't react to what happens equally what happens in all places. Geography matters. And here we are putting ourselves in a position where, so to speak, his attention is focused on us. So, like the Rambam writes, and it's quoted at the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, if you live in a country and there's a king, and the king has laws, when you go about your daily business, you know the laws, and if you're a loyal subject, you try to keep the laws the best you can. That's not the same as being in the throne room with the king on the throne. You'd behave very differently in the throne room in front of the king. So this is an opportunity to be in the throne room in front of the king. And that's what one should have in mind. Even the idea that I've placed God before me continuously, so I'm consciously aware of God's presence, but the presence isn't equal in all places. the way he interacts with all places isn't equal. Just like going into the temple, where there it was very severe. You didn't go in unless you had a purpose. You spent only the minimum amount of time to execute the purpose, and you left immediately because that place has a special element of presence that the other places don't have. So that's what you have to have in mind. It's like, the Ramchal says something very interesting in the Derech Hashem, the way of God, in the chapter on prayer. He says, the whole purpose of life is dveikus, is connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Well, connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a big job, and to do it in full measure would require decades of preparation and self-training and meditation and other types of preparation. And it's only a matter that's achieved in degree. And if someone starts out life, let's say at the age of 18 or 25, and realizes that dveikus is the goal, and he reads about what dveikus is, it could be very depressing. Maybe when I'm 62, I'll get close, but who knows, and he's 25. So Ramchal says, Kodesh Baruch Hu said, I give you from time to time free dveikus, free attachment. And prayer is one of them. Where you can be attached, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, in a certain way you could put it, that I'll come to you. I'm not waiting for you to make the journey to me, I'll come to you. I'll make myself available to you. So that's the gift that's given in prayer. And like the Kuzari says, prayer is food for the soul. And I think now he makes this analogy. Maybe I put it in, but I think he made the analogy. When you finish breakfast, one thing you know is where you're going to eat lunch, right? You're not hungry now, but in 4 hours you're going to be hungry. And that's where I'm getting lunch. I don't know why they're calling. No. Let me turn the phone off. I want to go to the optician, and they're calling me. I'll call them back. So this is the presence that you're being given, a kind of free dveikus. So when you finish breakfast, you know you're going to eat lunch. Says the Kuzari, when you finish chakras in the morning prayer, one thought you should have is, and then mincha. Be anticipating mincha, because prayer is like food for the soul, and it's your next meal. It's your next spiritual meal. So, if your day is organized, you think, okay, so mincha's coming up. That's the way it supports the person, this idea of being in God's presence. So it's certainly not physical, it's not spatial in terms of being close, 2 miles distant, 100 feet distant. Not that at all. Yeah.
I know it's getting on that topic a little bit, but is it possible to hold on from the tefillah, the dvikas that you have with tefillah, hold on to that and bring it out in other ways?
Okay, so he talks about that. Ramchal talks about that in that same place. Exactly right. He says, one of the things that distracts a person from God's presence is ego. And one of the ways ego expresses itself is when I work on something and I put effort in, I study it, and I analyze it, I create a strategy, and I'm successful, there's a gigantic temptation to say, I did it, to take credit for it. The Torah already anticipates this. Kochi v'otzum yoti, osa li yisachayil aseh. My strength and the power of my hand made all this success for me. How do you avoid that? So one way you avoid that is, if part of the prayer in the morning is to ask God for help, to ask Him, let's say, for parnasa, for physical, for material support, and then you go out and make a good business deal, well, it's 2.5 hours before you ask God for help. Maybe you'll remember when the business deal goes through that God is helping you. And that way you take it along with you, and use it to guard against a spiritual failing. So he does speak about that. It's something which you do take along with you and helps you to maintain your spiritual balance as you go through life. That's exactly right. Okay? Okay. So now we come to that name, the name, Yod and Hey and Vav and Hey. Now we spoke about this when we were doing the Shema, and I think again this is the simplest, most direct understanding of this name. The name is infinite, endless. One is that the root of the name, as the Ramban says, is the root of being, which implies that he has absolute being, necessary being, it's not contingent, and he's the only thing that has absolute necessary being. If you put that together and think a little bit, you get out a very important consequence. Let's see. He exists because of himself, not because of anything outside of him. His existence is necessary and absolute. Nothing else. Tables, stars, galaxies, time, space, justice, whatever it is, doesn't have that kind of being. Okay, where does the table come from? It comes from the factory. Where does the factory come from? People build it. Where do the people build it? They build it from raw materials which are in the earth. Raw materials in the earth, where did the earth come from? Eventually, you're going to get back to the one absolute necessary being who brought it into existence. Everything whose existence is contingent, just a matter of not necessity, could be, it could not be, could have been, could not have been, nothing's forcing it. Everything like that exists because Hashem gives it its existence, which means this titles Hashem as the creator. This understanding of the name Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey already titles God as creator. Well, of course, that's very, very central, isn't it? That's very, very fundamental. Okay, so that's one aspect. And the other aspect is the moral quality that's associated with this name, the four-letter name, is mercy. So the compound picture you get is this name describes God as the one who creates everything out of mercy. Now, that's a metaphysical idea tied together with a relationship idea. I owe my existence to a being who brings me into existence out of an act of mercy for me. That, I think, is, as I said, the most direct, fundamental understanding of the name, which a person can have, and it implies the right relationship with Hashem. And that's the qualities of Hashem that we're talking to when we pray. Other people and Kabbalistic sources have more, and so forth and so on, but this is a very good starting point. And I will mention a problem here, which, given what I said before, I'm not going to address it now because it's a long schmooze, but I'll just mention it. Before I talked about loving kindness, we talked about Baruch. I said my loving kindness is the source of the whole world, the source of the whole creation. That's the principle from which the whole creation is based. Now I tell you, the Yod and the Hey and Vav and the Hey is the word, the description of God as creator, and the associated quality is mercy. Why isn't the associated quality loving kindness? After all, this is the name of God that describes him as creator. I told you before that the creation is based on loving kindness. Why is it mercy? This bothered me for many, many years. I think I figured out one way to explain it, but I'm not going to do it now. But I just want to point out that there's a difference between loving kindness and mercy. They're not the same quality. This I heard on a tape from Dovid who was the mashgiach in Baltimore before I got there. And he said the following. What is mercy? Mercy is always an appeal not to do strict justice. Mercy is always an appeal not to do strict justice. Let's imagine you have a criminal trial going on. Someone's accused of a crime, and the trial is going on. At that time, you don't make an appeal for mercy, because an appeal for mercy is an admission of guilt. Guilt hasn't been declared yet. Maybe he'll be declared not guilty. Only after guilt has been declared is it time for appeal for mercy. Because mercy is always, okay, I'm guilty, and I know that guilt by the law does require that certain consequences should be carried out, but I'm asking that they not be carried out. And because mercy is always an appeal not to carry out strict justice, it has two weaknesses. Number one, a plea for mercy always has to have a reason. What do you mean you don't want justice to be carried out? Hello, justice is one of God's qualities. And that's what justice requires in this case. And you're saying God shouldn't act according to this principle, which is one of his principles? Give a reason why. It's not free. Mercy is not free. And number two, mercy has limits, because you can't just ignore the principle of justice. It is a genuine divine principle. So if you push mercy to the limits and simply say, let's cancel justice, that's not going to happen. So mercy has these two limitations built into it. Loving kindness has neither limitation, because loving kindness isn't a reaction to anything. It isn't a way of dealing with some prior existence altogether. Loving kindness is a starting point. Loving kindness is an expression of a dynamic within the agent, which leads to the initiation of action. God creates the world in order that there be creatures to whom he can benefit, to whom he can give good. So loving kindness is much stronger than mercy in those respects. And this makes the question that I asked 6 minutes ago even more difficult. Since the origin of the world is in loving kindness and not in mercy, and it couldn't be in mercy. Mercy pictures a situation already set up, with rules already in play, and agents who are not succeeding living up to the rules, and justice is demanding some kind of consequences. And then mercy says no. Why shouldn't the quality that's associated with the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey be loving kindness rather than mercy? So I'll leave that for you. I'll leave it to think about, talk about, ask other people about. I do have a shmooze on it, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm just telling you that the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey is associated with mercy. Okay, that's the thing you can have in mind, the merciful Creator, when you say that name. Now it says, our God and God of our fathers. Wow, we say that so many times. One of the enemies of understanding here is overfamiliarity. Sure, our God and God of our fathers. Can you think of a question to ask about that phrase? Why is it out of chronological order? Why do we put ourselves before our ancestors? Wouldn't it be at least as appropriate, if not more appropriate, to say the God of our fathers and our God? So the clever beginner says, oh, Rabbi, I have an answer for that. Take a look on page 79 or 78. We'll look at 79 for those who don't understand Hebrew. Right? 79 is the Song at the Sea. And about 10 lines down, it says, this is my God. I will build him a sanctuary. The God of my father, I will exalt him. Rabbi, there it is, black on white. In God's Torah. My God first, the God of my father second. To which the right question is, why is it written that way in the Torah? Okay, very good. The rabbis didn't make up the order. And in fact, this very phrase itself is written elsewhere. But why would we put this way? So again, like I tell you over and over again, there are many, many types of explanations. But here's one way to understand it, I think, in direct personal terms. You've heard of the feudal period, early medieval Europe. There were feudal lords, little l, who had groups of people who worked for them. They also had an army to protect them from robbers who roamed the countryside. And there was a contract between the serf, who was the one who was working and the feudal lord. And the contract was that the serf paid the lord a certain amount of his crops in order for the protection that the lord gave him. Lords varied. Some were cruel, and some used their powers in vicious ways, and some were responsible. They wanted things to be good for everybody. They got a profit from the farmers, but they had to employ an army, and they did protect them. There were free men who weren't serfs to anybody, but they took their chances because they were alone on the countryside and they could be vulnerable. Now, one way a person became a serf is to go to a lord and say, listen, I want to be your serf. I think it'll be good for me. So imagine Richard. He's 35 years old and he has a farm and he's suffering from theft. And he comes to the local lord. He says, listen, I want to become your serf and I'm happy to abide by the rules of the agreement. And the Lord takes him on and he's now a serf. Well, one of the conditions is your children are also serfs. Aha. So Richard has a son, Philip, and Philip is a serf by birth. Mm-hmm. And Philip grows up. He's born into it. That's his position. But he looks around, gets this feeling of how the world works, and he thinks, you know, my father was smart. This is a pretty good position. The Lord is kind and just, and he does protect, and I pay him the part, and I'd be much worse off if I were alone. And then Philip thinks, but the Lord doesn't know that. He doesn't know I feel that way because I was born into serfdom. I didn't have a choice. He may feel that I'm just his serf because the law requires it. I'd like the Lord to know that I appreciate being his serf. And if my father hadn't signed on, I would have signed on also. So he goes into the Lord and says, listen, I want something to tell you something. I'm very happy that I'm your serf. I'm the one who I would have signed on myself if I had initiated. Okay, now given all that background, if the phrase were the God of my fathers and my God, that would leave itself open to the interpretation, well, my fathers made a commitment to God, and I'm their children, I'm their child, and because I'm their child, I'm born into it, and that's where I am. I'm into it because I'm born into it. No. First, I want to say that he's my God, because I appreciate it, because I dedicate myself to it, because I'm committed to it. Yes, there's a historical background. Without the historical background, the whole system wouldn't exist. But I don't want that to be portrayed as if it were the sole source of my relationship with God. Okay? That's one way to explain our God and the God of our fathers. Now, having said that, the next phrase has to be taken with great care. It says, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. Gee, was there any doubt who our fathers are? The Avos, 999 times out of 1,000, refer to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Must it be spelled out? And then, why repeat God of 3 times? Why not say God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And then the beginner says, but Rabbi, this is a verse in the Torah. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Yes, it is. That's true. It's a verse in the Torah. But as a matter of fact, there's another verse in the Torah which says God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if you're looking to the Torah for your basis, you could have skipped the second 2 gods of. Something has to be communicated here about the fact that the God of is repeated. And what's being communicated, among other things, as I always say, is that each person's relationship with God is different. There are no repeats, there are no duplicates, no clones. Because although all of us are relating to the same God, but each of us is different. And since each of us is different, the relationship is going to be a different relationship. God was a God of Abraham, not in the same way that he was a God of Isaac, and not in the same way he was a God of Jacob. And the message for us is, when you look around you, and when you see people, especially people whose spirituality is somewhat visible and palpable and inspiring, and you are inspired to want to imitate them, which is a good thing to do, but you can't be a duplicate. It's not possible to be a duplicate. So you don't want to make yourself into what they are. You want to use their inspiration to become what you can become and what only you can become. And that's why I think it goes after our God and the God of our fathers, because the resources, the spiritual resources that are available to us are those which were originally brought into the world by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs. But those resources, just like an artist's palette, can combine the colors in such a way that no two pictures will be identical. So too, it's our job to take those resources and use them to build our own individual, unique relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And there's one consequence of this, and then I'll take your question. There's one consequence of this which I think is very important for us. 40 years ago, editor of the Jerusalem Post came down to interview people here at the yeshiva. I happened to be sitting in the conversation with Rav Natan Schiller, he should be well. And the editor asked, would you describe yourself, no, this was a reporter for the New York Times. Would you describe yourself as born-again Jews? Like a lot of the Christians call themselves born-again Christians. Rav Natan said, absolutely not. You don't start over fresh. You take what you have been and you integrate it into new priorities and new ultimate goals and new limitations and new styles of expression, but you don't start anew and jettison the past. You take the past with you. And for two reasons. First of all, psychologically, it's not realistic. But second of all, why would you want to do that? Was the past that you had accidental? Did it happen for no reason? We don't believe things like that. You were born into a certain family, a certain historical period, a certain geographical area, a certain culture, because that's the right setting for your soul to develop. So the development that you have, let's say you have your Jewish reorientation when you're 19 or 23, that doesn't mean the first 19 or 23 years are discarded. On the contrary, you have to now see that as the platform from which HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to continue to develop, only develop in a way that you hadn't anticipated before. Yeah.
Oh, why not mention the matriarchs here?
The truth is, when you know the literature, you understand very well that their presence is felt, even though their names aren't mentioned. This is a large question. Rabbi Meisman wrote a book on Jewish women and Jewish law, and in the book he distinguishes between authority and power. In political science, this is a typical distinction. A key difference between authority and power is that authority, is by its very nature, is public. Authority is where decisions come from that you have to follow. So they come from the king, or they come from the council, they come from the legislature, or they come from a judge. By definition, they have to be public because the populace has to follow them. Power can be secret. Power can be hidden. There's a phrase in English, the power behind the throne. And those who are cynical enough about democracy say, yeah, he voted for the bill, but it was that lobby that was pulling his hand up. Because without that lobby, he doesn't got funds to campaign next time and he won't be elected. So is he voting? Yes, sort of. He's the body in the Senate, but it's the people behind him who are voting because he needs them. So if you look at the relationship between men and women, a great deal can be said to show that women exert power, but often without publicity, because of something called tznius, which is privacy. One example we just had in last week's parsha, when Sarah tells Abraham, expel Ishmael and his mother, and he disagrees, and with evil in his eyes, And God says to Abraham, she's right, you're wrong, obey her and expel him. Who signs the expulsion order? Abraham. If the Torah hadn't told us, we would never have known that it was her decision that was being implemented, not his. Left to himself, he never would have done it. So, if you're into publicity, which in contemporary Western culture is a gigantically important value, then this looks like a disadvantage. If you're into being responsible for the good things to happen, making the good things happen, and you don't need your name in lights, then your focus is on power, not on publicity. So the general idea is that, when the Torah wants to describe to us these things so we can learn from them, but in general, you don't make these things more public than is necessary. Those who know the literature will know, when you talk about Abraham, Abraham's the one whom Sarah told to do it, and he didn't know what was right, and he had to be told that he was wrong, and he did it because she said so. So when you say Abraham, you're thinking about Sarah also. That's across the board. Okay? That's the beginning.